All right, I'm on.
Hey, man, it's good to see you. It's good to be back. Took about a month break.
Yeah.
OTXNT is back, people.
We're back. We're rested.
Those dedicated, 10 to 15 fans who are here. Unless that's you and I just rewatching it. And then I guess you and I are excited that we're back together. But that's all that matters is I like this with you. So my weekly update with you. All right. What are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to address the Lord's Day. We've talked about it, talked around it. So we're going to dig into the idea of the Lord's Day, the Sabbath. Is there a correlation? Is there not? And what does that mean for how we should act on Sunday?
Yeah, for sure. I've got some questions I'd love to throw at you too. So
yeah, well, it's fun. We're just
started.
Thinking out loud. So let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll jump into the topic. Join with me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. All right. So I guess the first thing I'd like to sound off on is, okay, obviously you can't have this discussion without just dealing with Sabbath and understanding of Sabbath, right? So we Sabbath is as old as Genesis. On the seventh day, God resting, but then it actually Sabbath makes it into the Big Ten, man. When it comes to the 10 Commandments, it makes it in. So God says, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, labor 6 days, and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male, female servant, your livestock, resident alien who is in your city gates. For the Lord has made the heavens, the earth, and sea, and everything in them in 6 days, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. So there's kind of that framework to work from. Like, so there's always been a history in Judaism of in the Old Testament of having the seventh day Saturday to where you would not work, you would not do anything. You were to rest. It was to be set apart for worship. As part of keeping it holy, right, is what developed into, synagogue and all of that, which came post, at the close of the Old Testament, where you do have that. But I mean, so that's kind of the base point. I think a lot of Christians just assume there's the rule about the Sabbath, and for some reason we're just Sunday people, and so we should just do the same thing. And we need to probably sift through that. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
As a New Testament guy, why do we make the jump from a Saturday to the Sunday? First question there.
Yeah, it's some of it might be pragmatic. We don't necessarily have the clear verse that says, and this is why the change is taking place. It is likely. Well, I don't want to go likely or not likely. There are pragmatic reasons, and then there are theological reasons. So I think the theological reason is that Sunday is the day that Christ rose from the grave as the first fruits offering. So on the festival of first fruits, he rose from the grave, and that marked the day that I think for many looked at this is the new covenant. And so now that we have achieved this time in history, we are pivoting from the Sabbath to Sunday, the Lord's Day, and that it's usually referred to as the Lord's Day, not necessarily the Christian Sabbath, but there's correlations. And so also the early Jews were probably worshiping on Saturday still.
Yeah.
And Sunday was pragmatically a good day to get used to the temple and to be able to worship. So I think a lot of the early Christians were practicing both the Sabbath and Sunday worship. But we also see from Revelation, from John, that Christ appears to his disciples subsequently on the Lord's Day. He shows up and greets Thomas. I believe that's on the Lord's Day. That it seems to be that is now the day that God is going to show up, that Christ will show up in a special way. And so our worship is gravitated towards Sunday in marking the new covenant, that Christ has come, sin is paid for. And so that is when we gather. That's when Christ has chosen since to show up and be among his people. And so what practices had been Saturday seemed to shift to Sunday for those two reasons.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. So technically speaking, when we say Sabbath, it's Sunday is not Sabbath. It's not the Sabbath, but we take the principle and it's kind of shifted towards, that's how we try to view Sunday for us, is we use the Lord's Day as it would be the Sabbath. And so I guess, there's questions about, can we do that? Should we still have a Saturday? Is it gone? And we do know that, that Jesus, I guess that the way you look at laws too, right, is sometimes we talk about what carries over from old to new covenant, and whatever has been affirmed by Christ. That's also something that you look at. And that's one way to look at it. And there's the other idea to say they're all relevant for us today too, at least in principle. And so I think that's a big one, right? The principle should be there. What principles are we seeing from the old law? Because it's God's wisdom for us. But yeah, I mean, you think about, obviously Jesus did fulfill the Sabbath. He says that about himself. We know that the Sabbath is something that even later on, right? Paul gives us a little bit of a debate that it's not essential, like which day necessarily that is that we set apart. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a theological thing. Like I think it's important for Christians to say, we don't just say, we're Christian now, we throw out the Sabbath. No, I think we need to really think through why we pick one or the other, or do we do like the early and just say actually Saturday and Sunday should be both kind of set apart for us? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, the Romans passage, Romans 14, one person judges one day to be more important than another day. Someone else judges every day to be the same. Let each one be fully convinced in his own mind. So in light of the new covenant, not being under the law, but rather living in the fulfillment of the law, we're not obligated to worship on the Sabbath or to treat the Sabbath as more special. However, we do need to be convinced in our own mind. And I think that does invite us then into discussion, because the early church gave us a model.
Yeah.
And that model is, I don't want to steal thunder, but I got the verses. Acts 20, on the first day of the week, we assembled to break bread. Paul spoke to them, and since he was about to depart for the next day, he kept on talking until midnight. So they were meeting on the first day of the week. Again, the first day of the week has become the gathering day. And so that, to me, seems to be the model that the early church gravitated toward. And so I don't see a reason not to do that, especially in light of Christ not only rising from the dead that day, but making subsequent appearances. If we go to Revelation, John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And so by the time that Revelation is written, people recognize the Lord's day, and he was in the Spirit. And then, of course, that's the day he's invited into the heavens to receive the vision from God. And so this seems to be a pattern and a type that is not obligatory, but in the freedom I have in Christ, I would want to honor him in this way. So I think Sunday is the day for believers, just as the old covenant was completed in some sense, and Christ now establishes the new covenant, the new creation, the first fruits. We celebrate on the Lord's day. But if you don't, it's not a mortal sin per se. However, if you believe that is significant, that we're called to worship, and you don't, and you violate your own conscience, it is a sin. And so these are things that we need to work out, but it's some of the things that are worked out through faith in Christ and obedience to his Spirit. So,
okay. So, I mean, I guess going through that passage that Paul brings up in Romans, right? When you're looking at Romans 14:5, when he says, one person esteems one day as better than the other, while another esteems all days alike, each one should be fully convinced in his mind. I mean, that does, at least for us, kind of bring some freedom of, I've thought about this too, like churches that are in areas where you've got a lot of people who, the way that their schedule works, that Sundays, everybody's working. So if you do something like a Saturday evening or a Friday, like that's not a problem, because it's not about the specific day. It's about, the Lord, all those belong to the Lord. But I do think there's that piece that we should model, right? Like, I mean, I remember growing up, I think as a kid, living overseas, for the most part, I never went to church on a Sunday morning, because in the Islamic world, Sunday through Thursday is the work week. Friday and Saturday are the days off. And so as a kid, I'd always be in school from Sunday through Thursday. And so church for us was usually like Friday night or Saturday night. That's where we went. That's when the international church met, was, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially depending on your culture of where it is.
Yeah.
But that practice that you bring up of gathering together, like what you see the early church doing, that should be happening. And I'll say this, it should be happening in the life of the church. It should be happening in the life of a Christian, because I think what happens sometimes is a Christian might say, well, Jesus is Lord over the Sabbath, and it's not about Sunday. And so I'm just blessing the Lord, by, sleeping in and enjoying his creation. You're not following the model that was about, to gather, to take the Lord's Supper together, to take the ordinances together, to celebrate with the people. That should all be taking place when you gather.
Right.
And you're not doing what was modeled for us. So that's kind of the first, I think, at least church-wise, I think it seems to be clear that we need to have a day that we gather. Right.
And that's the thing, is it's only one day. So, pick a different day and go do your lazy day thing, and why are you picking the moment that the church has chosen to gather? So be that Friday night, be that Saturday night, be that Sunday morning, Sunday evening, your local congregation that you're a part of, that is depending on you as members of the body, and you're depending on it for support. Why choose that brief window of time to worship apart? And that's the thing, every day is under the Lord. Okay, you had all the other days, you can spend time with the Lord, you can have individual time, you can go on a retreat, but when the church has chosen to gather, I think you ought to be there. And going back to Saturday, this is important too. What a blessing we have in America, because it was established as a Christian nation, or by Christians in the nation, that we did gravitate towards Saturday and Sunday off. So you actually do have 2 days off a week, not one like the Israelites. And you get that opportunity to have a day of rest and a day of worship. And so really, I don't think that was mandated, intentional in the sense like we have to honor both days, but it's kind of wonderful that we have a society where we can. And for me as a pastor, I try hard to not have much to do on Saturday in terms of work. I almost kind of go old school, and it's like, all right, I'm going to be dusk to dawn, or a dusk to dusk type Sabbath, and maybe run Saturday night through up to Sunday night, and kind of say that's my worship window. But because sometimes Sunday nights I am trying to get a jump on what's coming. But it doesn't have to be legalistic. It's just kind of trying to figure out exactly what is the best way to take care of my body, to take care of my spirit, because Sabbath is for us. It's not for God. So as a pastors, a lot of times, if we just look at Sunday, we just work ourselves all day, and it's not really a resting day for the pastor. Now it's a wonderful day of worship, but I think pastors need a day to rest.
No, and I think, that's an important piece too, because even Jesus brings that up as he's talking about the Sabbath, that the fact that, that even the Levites have to, we don't have a problem with the fact that the Levites are the ones working throughout the Sabbath, and that's something he brings up, like in Matthew 12, he uses the story about David. And then he even talks about, or haven't you read in the law on the Sabbath days that the priests in the temple violate the Sabbath and are innocent? Like there is always even some freedom even in the Sabbath laws, of understanding that, like, for those who are working, like, that's their day, and they're going to have to find some other way to rest. And that gives you some insight, right? I think Jesus is shrewd to put that in, to talk about it like that. So that's something I think about, which day, how do you do it? I do want to think about this idea of, keeping it holy, because I think we get, as a church, I think it's pretty simple for us as Christians to say, I get that I should gather, the church should be together. And, if you're looking at the reality is that, really Sunday was never a day off until Constantine decided that he was going to give Sunday be the official day of rest. So up until that point, the church is either gathering or they're early in the morning, like they're making effort before they go to work, those kind of things. And I think that's a good practice. Think about too, of like, do you have Bible study? Is it that important? Like they were dedicated. That being said, we get that the gathering piece, gather together, be with each other, make Sunday be your day. If your church is in a different context and you're on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening or whatnot, gather together, be to church. But how do you think a Christian family who is celebrating the rest that is given to us, that's been patterned by the Lord? I think that's a big thing we should remind ourselves, right? It was a pattern. He patterned rest. He didn't need to rest, but he did rest for us. How should we celebrate that besides making it a priority to go to church? And I will say, last thing, you've said many times, right, that gathering for church is one of the biggest things you could do that will change your family and you. It's like making that a priority. That's a huge deal. But what else do you think it means? That when he says to make the Sabbath holy, I think we should think about, how do I make my rest day or my day that I'm with for church holy? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's where it's important. It's not just a day of rest, it's a day of worship. And so part of it is putting our thoughts and our attention and our worship towards God on that day. And so, church is part of it. Gathering with God's people. That's why they did it that day. Everybody was off and it made sense. And we take this time to worship. And so it should be, holy means set apart. So it's set apart for the worship of God, and it's just set apart for rest. So I think that we really should incorporate those two ideas. I don't like when sports begin taking over Sunday. And I've known, if there's a strong Jewish population, a lot of times Sunday will be the day that sports take over, and Saturday they're not having those. As Christians concede Sunday, I don't think it's a sin, but just recognize what we're doing. As we have our club sports on Sundays and we do all these things on Sundays, they bleed into church, and eventually you don't have that day. And as society began having people working on Sundays, and so, what's interesting in Tucson is that all the car dealerships are closed on Sunday, which is so weird because you go to Phoenix to buy a car on Sunday because the dealerships here are closed. But it's like an old honoring of the old blue laws of things being closed on Sunday. And it's been pretty much just kind of an accepted practice with the big dealers down here that, we like having that day off. And so we aren't selling cars that day. Conceding that just means that now you're going to be that person that says, well, I have to work on Sunday, so I can't go to church, and I'm gonna have to try to get to Wednesday. And now the world we're living into is increasingly difficult for people to have a predictable schedule, which I think is unhealthy for people. And it makes it hard. I've got a lot of young guys that have come up that are in the hospitality field, and they are always working Sunday. And I have to remind them, well, at least come Wednesday night, you need to set some time aside. But the reality is that, we've been blessed to have the opportunity in our country to do what we can. So making it holy, I jumped a little bit further ahead there. I think is, again, dedicating it to the Lord, and then dedicating it again to rest. I'll confess, we usually go to McDonald's on the way to church Sunday morning, and it doesn't bother me that much. But there are days that it bothers me a little bit, because it's like I'm perpetuating the business model that's making these people work on Sunday, but at the same time I'm resting because we didn't have to make breakfast. So I don't know. What do you do with that?
Well, that's a big question, right? Of that we wonder about. And I've thought about this because I was listening to someone talk at one point, and they had said, they talk about like that. They're talking about their experience with Mormons, LDS, that were like, they're hardcore, like they're not going to eat at places after, like they go straight home, and they are in the home on on their Sundays. And I thought it was an interesting discussion to think about, like, what about Christians? Because I think we're always, it's always the joke, right? That we're the, we want to get out early enough to beat, the other people to the restaurants. And
right.
And that is a real, it is a real struggle, right? Like if we go long, the line at Jason's Deli is going to be much longer. And so come on, let's get with it. And so there is that piece, but like, is there a problem with going out to eat? Yeah, because the old days, you go and there's always something that was cooking at the house or crock potted or whatnot. And I wonder so much, how much is that is carry over? Like, I know that like in Israel, when they were told about the Sabbath rules, like especially during the Torah, they were not to make food because God was going to have it all for them already on the sixth day, right? And you're being told that, especially in some of this stuff that, you're going to rest. Okay. Seems like some of that would be difficult if you're making a big meal, that's can be a pain, which is like when you go to Judaism today, Judaism is very hardcore about, we're not going to make food. And so they have their Shabbat ovens and hot plates and things that will cook it, and they don't have to turn it on that day. Like it's just sitting ready to roll. And they go as extreme of lights on and off, and what that means to work. But I do go back to, okay, business. Should we do something about? Should we participate? And this is something that got me thinking more recently. This is the thing that just kind of made me wonder. We got Diana and I usually Fridays try to have our time where we read together, and we finish Ezra and Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, one of the big things it's kind of almost like in Nehemiah, it's like, guys, if I could just get you to do one thing, like let's just work on the Sabbath, like let's work on keeping the Sabbath, right? Mm-hmm. And so like you'll see like Nehemiah 10:31, it says, when the surrounding peoples, this is this vow everybody's going to be part of, right? When the surrounding peoples bring merchandise or any kind of grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or a holy day. We will also leave the land uncultivated in the seventh year. Then you see a little bit later in another passage, it says, at that time, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath. They were also bringing in stores of grain and loading them on donkeys, along with the wine, grapes, and figs, and all kinds of goods were being brought to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I warned them against selling food on that day. And the Tyrians living there were importing fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah and Jerusalem. And I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said, what is this evil that you're doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Didn't your ancestors do the same, so that God brought all this disaster on us, on our city? Now you're rekindling his anger against Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So that's Nehemiah 13. And so, okay, so obviously the idea of treading and buying and selling seems to be from a business thing is, that it's like, you don't need to make money this day. You need to take the day off. You need to rest, right? But there is that piece of like, it is interesting that Nehemiah is like, look, these Tyrians have brought in all this fish and, they're selling them. We're not going to buy from them, to the point of like, even later on, like right after that, he closes the gates up and he tells the merchants, don't come back on the Sabbath until it's over. And so that made me think about this more recently of like, is that I guess the way I look at that is say, is that something that is normative for us, or is that really more descriptive of the way that they were saying, like, I'm going to do this. I just need to do this for the people. And there's a part of me that thinks that, right? Like we really got to nail this down for the people. They're not doing this. We're going to shut it all down. Yeah. So I don't know. I think about that of like, well, there's a verse, right? Don't eat and buy and sell. Like you shouldn't go to Walmart, get it all done before. But then again, I don't know if it's as strict. I think there's freedom in the Sabbath, being a new covenant people, that makes me pause. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. And again, it's a good example of the difference between being under the law and not. At the same time, we agree that there's principles at play with what God was doing in the law. And so, there are some things that we could say would be good because it would be a testimony. Every Christian I know gets surprised on their way home from church when they're like, let's get Chick-fil-A. And then they're like, oh no, it's Sunday.
The one day I want it. Yeah.
And it's a testimony. Again, every time you're like, God bless Chick-fil-A, because it's a testimony that they're standing on principle, and that principle is rooted in Scripture. And so you're kind of like, that's awesome. And so I think that we have opportunity by emulating these laws to testify to ourselves, to our kids, to our families, to the people at the restaurants. If Sundays just were not worth it to these fast food places and these restaurants, then they wouldn't be open on Sunday either. And the Christians have the capacity to bankrupt that day if we wanted to. So I don't know that it's legalistic. I mean, I think it would be legalistic. I don't think we're required to do that. But, you know, the question I'm always looking for is like, how can I do better, Lord? How could I do more? You know, and, you know, the Old Testament didn't play around. I mean, the first example you get after the law's given is them stoning a guy for working on the Sabbath. And so it was real, and it was a theocracy. I don't think we're held to that same kind of accountability there. But what principle was at play? And wouldn't it be nice if we treated Sunday in the same way with the same care? I think we probably ought to. It's just kind of I'm not going to be super guilty if I don't. But if I was king of Arizona, I might think a little bit more like Constantine and say, you know what we're going to do is we're just going to mandate this from the top. I think that's more of the secular or the governing sphere rather than the church's requirement. And that's what you see with Ezra, Nehemiah. You know, they are working in that governing sphere, and they're trying to say, okay, what can we do from a legal position to enforce?
I mean, they shut the gates down. They made it where it's over, right? And I think that's probably the thing is they did their part to say we're going to shut this down as a government. And you know, because you know how it is like, okay, yeah, I'll just stop by and I'll buy these things on the way home kind of a thing. And so when you don't have those in place, it really, it's rest. It's not rest for me. I mean, it's rest for me to just go and eat somewhere, but somebody else is going to work. And I guess that kind of makes you think too of like, okay, you know, just about options as a church. Like if we really believe that the Lord's Day is any day, and that we should be gathering, but do we create other opportunities? If we're going to say, yeah, we don't mind going, eating places, buying, selling, which I don't. I mean, that's where I'm at. I enjoy getting out and spending time with my family. It's one of the few days that you just get to be together, and we go do, especially out here, it's so stinking hot. And you go walk around at a store somewhere or do something together. It's one of those things where do I offer though opportunity for people, you know, to be involved at the church beyond just Sunday? Is there something real we can say, hey, we know you're working, everybody has to do it every now and then, but come back and be with us this week. You know, I know those are just things I think.
But notice that now you have to because we live in a society that Sunday's not sacred. Now I've got to work more days. You know, where before there was no excuse. Everybody, you know, can be at church on Sunday, other than maybe some very specific industries. But then we had 2 services on Sunday. And so you could at least make one of the 2, depending on if you worked in that morning. Hopefully you'd be free in the evening. And I'm thinking of medical industries and things that, you know, don't operate in the same way. But now we are in a situation where because we conceded this day as a society, not as a church, but as a society, now, in order for the church to reach the people that work Sundays, I have to create more meetings. And so it actually ends up creating more work for everybody because we just didn't do it God's way, per se. Now, again, I don't think it's law. I think it's this is what happens in freedom. We are free in Christ. We have freedom. Paul says, pick a day. What happens with most Christians is they don't have any day. And so they are in sin. So we should either give every day to the Lord, or, you know, if you value one day over another, but the principles are at work. So I do think, you know, again, would it be good? We're going to have a big church picnic for Back to Church Sunday. You know, we're probably going to go pick up fried chicken and subs from Walmart or Fry's. In order to have a big church picnic. You know, it's like, well, is that the most hypocritical thing ever, or is it really not that big of a deal? You know, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I don't think anyone's having the conversation we're having where it's like, well, let's even think it through.
Well, I think here's where I kind of land at the end of the day. If we're going to have a day of rest, we should have a day of rest. I think everybody should. You know, this idea of working all the time, never resting, you should have a day of rest. And you should also think that one of my days, I need to have a day that I make a holy day, a day where at minimum, I recognize the Lord and I go to be with his people and I gather for for worship, right? And I don't even think we're doing that anymore. We're not even giving the minimum of making it holy. And so I think that this is a call, I think, for all of us to say, let's take the rest, and trust him. I don't have to work every day to make it happen. I can just enjoy and rest and not try to have another. I mean, that's the new thing too. If you've seen the news, it's like some of the job numbers are because people are now taking 2 or 3 jobs to just try to make ends meet. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I should trust God that I am going to have a day where I will not rest, and I'm not going to fill it with a bunch of other activities that are going to drive me, crazy, and busy, but I'm going to try to have a real rest day. And then, if your rest day is not the same day as your Sunday, at least whether you can make it on Sunday or not, find the day that you can say, I'm going to make this day holy. I'm going to sit apart and gather with the people. I'm going to teach my children, things like that. I think that are important to do, to really do that well, and not just say, I'm just enjoying rest.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, because so much, again, going back to kids and athletics and all of that, I always have to tell my church that, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I'm going to bet that your kid's not going to the big game. They're not going to be an NBA star. They're not going to be playing for the MLB. I'm so sorry that I'm crushing dreams. But the reality is that we've got these weird desires that really are flowing from parents. What would be more beneficial to the kid is to say, you know what, we're going to maybe do less of these activities, but we're going to not sit around on our tablets all day. We're going to spend time as a family, and we're going to do some study of the scripture as a family. We're going to, be engaged together, because I do think that young families are running themselves ragged. And part of the reason you don't have the days off is because you got kids in 6 different sports, and you're doing all these different things, like keep them busy so they don't sin. There's some value there, but try to think through here. There's some godly ways to work through this. And anyway, I think it would be fun. I always like to compare the Southern Baptist Faith and Message from 1925 to 2000. I've got the 1925 one. So here's the current one. The first day of the week is the Lord's Day. It is a Christian institution for regular observance. It commemorates the resurrection of Christ from the dead and should include exercises of worship and spiritual devotion, both public and private. Activities on the Lord's Day should be commensurate with the Christian conscience under the lordship of Christ. So that's where we're at today. But if you go back to 1925, that second clause said, both public and private worship, and by refraining from worldly amusements and resting from secular employments, works of necessity and mercy only accepted. So we went from this day needs private and public worship, and we should refrain from worldly amusements, resting from secular employments. We should rest from secular employments. Works of necessity and mercy only accepted. So what Christ said, doing good on the Sabbath is accepted. But now it's just an issue of conscience. And maybe we're right today, but just get that in your mind of the change, that it was understood that we shouldn't be doing secular employment, and we shouldn't it's not the day to go to the amusement park. It's the Lord's Day. So the holiness there was a little different than it is today. So
yeah, that is interesting. That difference it's just different times too. We live in a different world than we did then too. What a difference 100 years makes.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, because I want to go back to that day where the general impetus of the society was such that, we're not doing stuff on this day. We don't go to Disneyland on Sunday. They need to be closed on Sunday so their people can come to church. That kind of mentality was just perpetuating society and culture. And I wish we were there. We're not there, and our society is much less Christian than it once was. But one of the things that we can do in our own households is to prayerfully consider, at least, Lord, what am I doing on the Lord's Day? And am I emulating the call to rest and the call to worship that we see in the Old and the New Testament?
Yeah, I agree. You said it right. I'm not adding anything to that. I think that's the best way to close this thing off, man, is just like that. So think about what you do with your family. You can comment below. Let us know, how you do that. It is sad that, the days like Sunday is usually the one day I actually think I want Chick-fil-A. And it's always, so I'm sorry. I don't go to Chick-fil-A enough because I only usually want it on Sunday. I want fried chicken after church. And I don't know. I think I just like theirs. So Cane's is open though.
Well, God bless Chick-fil-A.
I should have let you finish. I should have just let that be and not make the last words. Go to Cane's. Let's finish with the priestly blessings from number 6. May the Lord bless you and protect you, and may the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. God bless. Thank you guys for watching, and we look forward to doing another one next week. And we're still looking for topics. If you're interested, one that we're going to probably do pretty soon: cremation, burial. Is there a choice to be made? Is there freedom in that, or is there not? So something we should probably all think through. All right. Hey, we'll talk a little bit later. See you guys. Bye-bye.